If everything you thought you knew about yourself, your name, your family, your entire life turned out to be a lie, how would you react? Leave a comment. Number 1 if you were terrified, number 2 if you thought it was okay. In today's fascinating story, we're going on a journey to rediscover ourselves, including the identity of a millionaire after a stormy night of shopping, with unexpected twists and turns. If you're ready for this journey, hit the subscribe button and leave a comment below. Where are you watching from? I want to know. New York, Texas, somewhere in the world? Let's explore. The rain hammered Seattle like it had a personal grudge, sheets of water slamming against the massive windows of the Sullivan estate in Queen and Hill. Inside, the air smelled of old money, polished oak, expensive wine, and a faint whiff of Margaret Sullivan's Chanel perfume. Jake Sullivan stood in the middle of the grand living room, his soaked sneakers leaving muddy streaks on the pristine hardwood floor. His dark hair dripped water onto his collar, but he didn't care. In his trembling hand, he clutched a crumpled piece of paper, a birth certificate that didn't bear his name. Not the one he'd known for 30 years, anyway. Explain this, he said, voice low but sharp as a blade. He tossed the document onto the glass coffee table, where it landed with a soft thud between his parents' wine glasses. The name on it glared up at them, Mateo Ortiz. Born April 14, 1994. Mother Rosa Ortiz. Daniel Sullivan, gray-haired and broad-shouldered, barely glanced at it. He leaned back in his leather armchair, swirling a glass of Cabernet like this was just another Tuesday night. Margaret, perched on the edge of the sofa in her silk blouse, sighed a tight, annoyed sound that Jake knew too well. Jake, don't be dramatic, she said, her tone cool as the rain outside. Sit down. You're making a mess. A mess? Jake's laugh was bitter, jagged. You stole me. Tell me it's not true. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line, but her hazel eyes didn't flinch. She set her wine glass down with a delicate clink. We didn't steal you, Jake. We saved you. Gave you a life Rosa Ortiz never could have dreamed of. Jake's chest heaved. His fists clenched so tight his knuckles turned white. Saved me? You paid someone to snatch me from my real mom and bury the truth. Say it. Say it out loud. Daniel finally looked up, his jaw tightening. You're ours, son. That's what matters. Money talks, and it shut that case down years ago. End of story. The room spun. Jake's heartbeat thundered in his ears, drowning out the rain. These were the people who'd raised him, taught him how to tie a tie, sent him to private schools, handed him a corner office at their company. And now they sat there, calm as hell, admitting they built his life on a lie. Something inside him snapped. You're monsters, he growled. Before he could stop himself, he grabbed Daniel's wine glass and hurled it against the wall. It shattered, red liquid streaking down the cream wallpaper like blood. Margaret flinched, but Daniel didn't move. Jake didn't wait for a response. He turned on his heel, stormed out the front door, and let the rain swallow him whole. 3 weeks earlier, the rain had been just as relentless. Jake stood under the awning of a downtown high-rise, the collar of his tailored trench coat flipped up against the wind. His phone buzzed in his pocket, probably his assistant, nagging him about the board meeting he was already late for. He ignored it. The city smelled like wet asphalt and coffee, the kind of damp chill that seeped into your bones. He adjusted his tie, ready to hail a cab, when he saw her. She was huddled a few feet away, pressed against the building's brick wall like she could melt into it. A woman, mid-20s maybe, with dark hair plastered to her pale face. Her thin jacket was soaked through, and she clutched a baby wrapped in a soggy pink blanket. The kid's tiny face was flushed red, little fists balled up against the cold. Jake's eyes flicked to them, then away. Not his problem. He had a meeting to save, a boss to appease, a life to keep on track. But then the baby whimpered, a weak, pitiful sound that barely cut through the storm. He froze. Something about it tugged at him, a pang he couldn't name. He looked again. The woman's lips trembled, her arms tightening around the kid like she could shield it from the world. Hey, he called, voice rough over the rain. Why are you standing out here like this? She didn't answer, just stared at the ground. Water dripped from her nose, her eyelashes. Jake stepped closer, the toes of his polished loafers splashing in a puddle. You need help, or what? Her head lifted slowly. Tired brown eyes met his eyes that looked like they hadn't slept in days. Please, she whispered, voice cracking. I just need a place to. She stopped, pulling the baby closer as a gust of wind whipped past. Jake glanced at his watch. 6:47 p.m. If he didn't leave now, he'd be toast at that meeting. His boss, Gary, would chew him out in front of the whole board and he'd spend the next month kissing ass to fix it. But those eyes, hers and the baby's, pinned him in place. He exhaled sharply, digging into his pocket without thinking. His apartment keys jingled as he yanked them out and held them toward her. "Go to my place," he said, clipped and businesslike. "Get warm. There's food in the kitchen. 54th floor, 210 Pine Street. Don't trash it." Her wide eyes darted between his face and the keys like she couldn't believe it. She didn't move. Jake's patience frayed. "Look, I don't have time for this. Take him or stay out here. Your call." Her fingers hesitated, then wrapped around the keys, cold and shaky. "I'll leave by morning," she said, quick and almost apologetic. "I swear." "Yeah, whatever." Jake was already turning away, jogging toward the street with one arm raised. A yellow cab screeched to a stop and he slid inside, slamming the door. "Pike Place," he barked at the driver, brushing wet hair out of his eyes. His mind raced ahead to the meeting, the hell he was about to walk into. The woman and her kid were already fading to the back of his brain, an act of charity he'd forget by tomorrow. Hours later, Jake stumbled into his apartment, rubbing the back of his neck. The meeting had been a disaster. Gary had ripped him a new one, and he'd barely salvaged the deal with a half-ass pitch. All he wanted now was a beer and his bed. The place was dark, silent as a tomb. He dropped his coat by the door, loosened his tie, and shuffled toward the living room. It looked exactly like he'd left it. Couch cushions straight, kitchen counter spotless. No sign of the woman or her baby. Maybe she'd bailed with his keys. Smart move if she had. He snorted, kicking off his shoes. Good riddance. Then he saw it. His laptop sat open on the coffee table, screen glowing blue in the dim room. He frowned. He hadn't touched that thing since last night. His pulse ticked up as he crossed the room, socks silent on the hardwood. The screen showed a news article, an old one, dated 1997. A grainy black and white photo stared back at him. A 3-year-old boy with dark hair, sharp cheekbones, and piercing blue eyes. Eyes that looked exactly like the ones he saw in the mirror every damn day. The headline hit him like a punch to the gut. Missing. Mateo Ortiz, age 3, last seen in San Antonio, Texas. Jake's breath caught. What the hell was this? His fingers hovered over the trackpad, itching to close it, but he couldn't move. A chill crawled down his spine, not from the rain still clinging to his clothes, but from something deeper, something he couldn't name. "Sarah?" he called, voice sharp, cutting through the stillness. No answer. He spun around, scanning the empty apartment. His heart hammered against his ribs. The place was spotless, untouched except for that damn laptop. He strode toward the hallway, pulse racing, and shoved open the guest room door. There she was. The woman Sarah, apparently sat on the edge of the bed, cradling her sleeping baby. She changed out of her wet clothes into one of his old sweatshirts, her damp hair brushed back. The kid, Lily, breathed softly in her arms, wrapped in a dry blanket she must have found in the closet. Jake clenched his jaw. "Why are you still here?" She looked up, unfazed by his tone, and nodded once like that explained everything. His eyes flicked back toward the living room, to that glowing screen. "Did you go through my stuff?" "No," she said simply, adjusting the baby's blanket. "Then explain that," he snapped, jabbing a finger toward the hallway. Sarah's gaze held his, steady and unreadable. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, too calm. "I didn't touch anything, Jake. You were always gonna find it." His blood turned to ice. "What the hell does that mean?" She didn't blink. "It means you don't know who you really are." Hey, if you're hooked on Jake's story and wondering what's coming next, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. Should he trust Sarah? Or is this all some crazy game? Let's find out together. Jake stood in the doorway of the guest room, his shadow stretching across the hardwood floor. The air in his Seattle apartment felt thick, heavy with the weight of Sarah's words. "You don't know who you really are." They echoed in his head, bouncing around like a pinball he couldn't catch. Outside, the rain kept pounding, a dull roar against the windows, but inside, it was dead quiet except for the soft breathing of the baby in Sarah's arms. He crossed his arms, leaning against the frame to steady himself. "You've got 5 seconds to explain what the hell you're talking about or you're out. I don't care if it's pouring." Sarah didn't flinch. She shifted Lily gently, the kid's tiny chest rising and falling under the blanket, then looked up at him with those tired brown eyes. "Your name isn't Jake Sullivan," she said, voice steady as a rock. "It's Mateo Ortiz. You were taken when you were 3, from San Antonio, Texas." Jake blinked. Then he laughed, a harsh, barking sound that scraped his throat. "You're insane. I'm Jake Sullivan, born and raised in Seattle. I've got a driver's license, a corner office, a life. You think I'm some missing kid from Texas?" Sarah didn't crack a smile. She reached into the beat-up backpack beside her on the bed, moving slow like she didn't want to spook him. Her fingers pulled out a faded photograph, edges worn soft from years of handling. She held it out. "Look at this." Jake hesitated, his gut twisting. He didn't want to touch it, didn't want to give her crazy story an inch. But those eyes of hers, damn it, they pinned him again. He snatched the photo, holding it up to the dim light from the hallway. It was a snapshot, old and grainy. A little boy, maybe 3, sat in the dirt of some backyard, a striped t-shirt hanging loose on his skinny frame. His dark hair was a mess, sticking up like he'd just rolled out of bed, and his blue eyes, sharp, bright, unmistakable, stared straight at the camera. Next to him was a girl, pigtails swinging, grinning wide with her arms slung over his shoulders. Jake's throat tightened. That girl looked like Sarah, a younger, happier Sarah. He flipped the photo over. On the back, in neat cursive, someone had written, "Mateo and Sarah, summer '97. "This doesn't mean Jack," he said, tossing it back onto the bed. His voice came out rougher than he meant. "Some kid who looks like me? That's your proof? Come on." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she didn't snap back. She just picked up the photo and slid it into her bag, then pulled out another piece of paper, a photocopy this time. She handed it over without a word. Jake took it, his hands moving on autopilot. It was a birth certificate. Name, Mateo Ortiz. Date of birth, April 14th, 1994. Mother, Rosa Ortiz. Father, unknown. His birthday, his exact damn birthday. He stared at it, the black ink blurring as his pulse kicked up. "Where'd you get this?" "From your aunt," Sarah said softly. "Clara Ortiz. She's still in San Antonio." "My aunt?" Jake's head snapped up. "I don't have an aunt. I've got Daniel and Margaret Sullivan, and that's it. This is some scam, right? You dig up old records, slap my birthday on M, and what, hustle me for cash?" Sarah's eyes flashed, the first crack in her calm. "You think I'd drag my kid through the rain for a scam? I've been looking for you for 20 years. Jake, 20 years, because I promised your mom I wouldn't stop." "My mom's name is Margaret," he shot back, but the words tasted wrong, like a lie he'd swallowed too long. "No," Sarah said, leaning forward now, voice firm. "Your real mom was Rosa Ortiz. She never stopped searching for you. She died last year, still hoping you'd come home." Jake's legs felt shaky, but he locked his knees to stay upright. He wanted to yell, to throw her out, to slam the door on this whole messed up night. But that photo, that kid with his eyes, and the birth certificate burned into his brain. He turned away, storming back to the living room, needing air, space, anything to clear his head. The laptop still glowed on the coffee table, that damn article staring at him. He sank onto the couch, running a hand through his wet hair. The screen hadn't changed. Missing, Mateo Ortiz, age 3, last seen in San Antonio, Texas. He skimmed the text, each word hitting like a brick. Disappeared from his backyard, August 15th, 1997. No forced entry. Case closed 1999, no leads. His stomach churned. August 97. He'd be 3 then, but he didn't remember Texas. He remembered Seattle rainy days, the Space Needle, his dad teaching him to ride a bike in the driveway. Didn't he? He pulled out his phone, fingers shaking as he scrolled to a contact. Tom Hayes. Old college buddy, now a detective with Seattle PD. If anyone could call bullshit on this, it was Tom. He hit call. "Jake?" Tom's voice came through, groggy. "It's past midnight, man. You okay?" "No," Jake said, voice tight. "I need you to dig into something. Mateo Ortiz. Missing kid from San Antonio, '97. Tell me it's not me. There was a pause, then the sound of Tom shifting, probably sitting up in bed. Whoa, slow down. What's this about? Just do it, Tom. Check the records. I need to know. All right. Give me a day. This sounds heavy, man. You sure you're good? No, Jake said again, and hung up. He dropped the phone onto the cushion, staring at the laptop. The room felt too small, the walls pressing in. He glanced back toward the guest room. Sarah hadn't followed him, but he could feel her presence, waiting. His mind raced, picking at memories like loose threads. The Sullivan family album's fancy leather books his mom kept on the shelf. He'd flipped through them 100 times as a kid. First day of school, vacations in Aspen, Christmases with too many presents. But now that he thought about it, no baby pictures. Not one before he was 4, already walking, already talking. He'd never questioned it. Why would he? The front door creaked open behind him, and he spun around, half expecting Sarah to bolt. But she just stood there, Lily asleep against her shoulder, her backpack slung over one arm. I'll go if you want, she said quietly, but you deserve to know the truth. Truth? Jake's voice cracked. If this is true, then who the hell am I? Sarah didn't answer right away. She adjusted Lily, brushing a strand of hair from the kid's face, then met his eyes. You're Mateo Ortiz, and I'm not leaving till you believe it. The next day dragged like a bad hangover. Jake barely slept, crashing on the couch with the laptop still open. Sarah stayed in the guest room. He heard Lily fussing at dawn, Sarah's soft humming calming her down. He didn't kick them out. Couldn't. Not yet. Work was a blur. He sat through meetings at Sullivan Beckman Holdings, nodding at the right times, but his head was somewhere else. By 5 p.m., his phone buzzed Tom. He ducked into an empty conference room, shutting the door. Jake. It's me, Tom said, voice low. I pulled some strings, got a look at the Mateo Ortiz file. The sealed tight, way tighter than it should be for a cold case. But I got a summary. Jake gripped the phone. And? Kid went missing from San Antonio, August 97. 3 years old. Mom's name was Rosa Ortiz. Case closed in 99, no explanation. Weird thing is, there's a note about a private adoption linked to it off the books, hushed up fast. Jake's mouth went dry. Adoption? Yeah. And get this, there's a mention of a woman, Clara Ortiz, filing complaints years later, saying the cops were paid off. She's still alive, last known address in San Antonio. Clara, the aunt Sarah had talked about. Jake's knees buckled, and he leaned against the wall. You're telling me this could be real? I'm telling you it's fishy as hell, Tom said. I'd need more time to crack the seal. But man, what's going on with you? Jake didn't answer. He hung up, staring at the glass wall of the conference room. His reflection looked back, blue eyes, sharp jaw, the same damn face from that photo. He thought of Sarah waiting back at his place. He thought of the Sullivans sipping wine like nothing was wrong. And he thought of a woman named Rosa Ortiz, searching for a kid who didn't even know she existed. He grabbed his coat and headed home. When he walked in, Sarah was in the kitchen heating a bottle for Lily. She looked up, reading his face like an open book. Well? She asked. Jake swallowed hard. If this is true, who the hell am I? The plane touched down in San Antonio with a jolt that rattled Jake's nerves more than it should have. He hadn't slept worth a damn too many hours staring at the ceiling of his Seattle apartment, Sarah's words, and that damn birth certificate spinning in his head. Now he was here, stepping off a Southwest flight into the blazing Texas heat, the air thick with dust and a dry tang he wasn't used to. His trench coat felt ridiculous slung over his arm, his tie was stuffed in his carry-on. He didn't look like Jake Sullivan, corporate hotshot, anymore. He didn't feel like him either. Sarah walked beside him, Lily strapped to her chest in a baby carrier. She hadn't said much since they'd boarded, just watched him with those quiet brown eyes like she knew he was a hair away from bolting. He'd almost backed out at the gate, told her this was nuts, that he wasn't flying halfway across the country to chase ghosts. But then she'd handed him Rosa's letter again, the one that started, Mateo, wherever you are, I hope you're safe. He'd folded it into his pocket and gotten on the plane. You sure about this, Clara lady? He asked, voice rough as they headed for the rental car lot. The sun beat down, glinting off rows of dusty sedans. She's your aunt, Sarah said simply, adjusting Lily's sun hat. She's been waiting for you longer than I have. Jake snorted, unlocking a gray Toyota Camry. Yeah, well, I didn't ask for a family reunion. He tossed his bag in the back, slid into the driver's seat, and cranked the AC. Sarah buckled Lily into a car seat she'd hauled along, then climbed in beside him. The GPS chirped, 32 minutes to destination. He gripped the wheel, knuckles white, and pulled out onto the highway. San Antonio sprawled out around them, low, flat houses with cracked stucco, taco stands on every corner, and wide open sky that made Seattle's gray gloom feel like a distant memory. Jake kept his eyes on the road, but his mind wandered. What was he doing here? Chasing some fairy tale about a mom he didn't remember? He'd built a life damn good one, too. Corner office, six-figure salary, a view of Puget Sound from his apartment. And now he was sweating in a rental car, hunting for answers he wasn't sure he wanted. They pulled up to a single-story house on the edge of town, its beige paint peeling under the relentless sun. A rusted pickup sat in the driveway, and a lone cactus stood guard by the front steps. Jake cut the engine, staring at the screen door. This it? Sarah nodded. Clara's place. She unbuckled Lily and stepped out, leaving him no choice but to follow. He knocked, the sound sharp against the quiet hum of cicadas. The door creaked open a second later, and there she was, an older woman, maybe 60, with dark eyes and gray streaks in her black hair. She froze, staring at him like he'd just walked out of a dream. Her hands, wrinkled but strong, reached out, hovering like she was afraid he'd vanish. Mateo? She whispered, voice cracking. Jake's heart slammed against his ribs. I'm Jake, he said, stepping back. Jake Sullivan. Clara's eyes welled up, tears spilling over before she could stop them. My God, it's you. She lunged forward, wrapping him in a hug that smelled like flower and lavender. He stiffened, arms pinned awkwardly at his sides. Over her shoulder, he caught Sarah's gaze, calm, steady, like she'd expected this. Okay, he muttered, pulling free. Let's just slow down. Clara wiped her face with a shaky hand, nodding. Come in, come in. She ushered them into a cramped living room, old furniture, faded curtains, walls lined with framed photos of people Jake didn't know. A fan buzzed in the corner, stirring the warm air. Sarah sat on a sagging couch, settling Lily on her lap, while Jake stood, too wired to relax. I need to understand, he said finally, crossing his arms. Start talking. Clara sank into an armchair, hands clasped tight. Your mom, Rosa, she was my everything. We grew up with nothing, just the two of us against the world. When she had you, her voice softened, eyes distant. I've never seen her so happy. You were her little shadow, Mateo, always laughing, always following her around. Jake swallowed hard. He didn't remember laughing, didn't remember following anyone. His earliest memory was a rainy Seattle day, Daniel handing him a toy truck. Then what? Clara's face darkened. One day, you were gone. August 97. You were playing in the backyard. Rosa was cooking dinner. I was watching you. I stepped inside for a minute, just one damn minute, and when I came back, she choked on the words. You were gone. Jake's hands curled into fists. What did the cops do? They searched us too. Everywhere. But it went cold too fast. Too neat. A few years later, they closed it, said there was nothing left to find. Clara's eyes hardened. Rosa never bought it. She swore someone took you, someone with pull. She kept looking till the day she died. The room spun. Jake's legs felt weak, but he locked them in place. Someone with pull. Daniel Sullivan's voice echoed in his head, money talks. His adoptive parents had cash, connections enough to make a kid disappear and a case vanish. He shook his head, trying to push it down. You think my parents knew? Clara's expression turned to stone. I don't think, Mateo. I know. His stomach twisted. Before he could respond, a smell hit him, warm, familiar, tugging at something buried deep. He turned. Clara had left a pan of cornbread cooling on the kitchen counter, its golden edges crisping in the heat. He froze, a flicker of something, someone, not the baby, not the mom, just the smell. It wasn't a memory, not exactly, but a feeling like he'd sat at a table somewhere, waiting for that scent to fill the air. He shook it off, shoving it aside. I need air, he muttered, stepping outside. The porch creaked under his weight as he pulled out his phone, Rosa's letter crinkling in his pocket. He dialed Daniel's number, pacing the cracked concrete. Jake? Daniel's voice came through, sharp and impatient. Where the hell are you? San Antonio, Jake said, voice tight. I need answers. Did you know about Mateo Ortiz? A beat of silence. Drop this, Jake, Daniel snapped. You're our son. That's all that matters. And Rosa Ortiz? Jake pressed. She came looking for me, didn't she? Margaret's voice cut in, cool and clipped. She'd grabbed the phone. Don't ruin your life over some poor woman's delusions, Jacob. You're a Sullivan. Act like it. Jake's grip tightened, the plastic creaking. Tell me the truth. We raised you, Daniel said, hard now. Why dig up old dirt? Come home. No, Jake shot back. Not till I know. He hung up, chest heaving. They hadn't denied it, not really. He sank onto the porch steps, staring at the letter in his hands. Rosa's handwriting looped across the page. Mateo, I hope you're happy. I never stopped looking. His throat burned. She'd searched for him, died searching while he'd been living it up in Seattle. Oblivious. Sarah stepped out, Lily asleep against her shoulder. You okay? No, he said, voice raw. She should have found me. She tried, Sarah said quietly. That's what matters. Jake looked up, eyes hard. I'm going back to Seattle. Tomorrow. They're gonna tell me face to face or I'm done with them. Sarah nodded, like she'd known he'd say it. I'll book the flights. He stood, folding the letter back into his pocket. Texas felt too big, too real, like it could swallow him whole if he let it. He needed answers and he wasn't waiting anymore. Jake's heading back to confront the Sullivans. What do you think they'll say? If you're hooked on this ride, smash that subscribe button and drop a comment below. Would you forgive them or walk away for good? Let's talk about it. The flight back to Seattle felt like a fever dream, turbulence rattling the plane. Jake's head pounding with every jolt. He'd barely spoken to Sarah since they'd left San Antonio, just stared out the window at the endless clouds. Rosa's letter burning a hole in his pocket. Lily slept in Sarah's arms, oblivious to the storm brewing inside him. He didn't know what he'd say when he saw Daniel and Margaret again, but he knew one thing. He wasn't leaving till he had the truth, even if it tore everything apart. By the time he pulled the rental car up to the Sullivan estate, the rain was back, Seattle's signature welcome, cold and relentless. The Queen and Hill mansion loomed ahead, all sharp angles and glowing windows, a fortress of wealth and secrets. Jake's stomach churned as he stepped out, gravel crunching under his boots. Sarah stayed in the car with Lily, giving him a nod that said, you've got this. He wasn't so sure. He didn't knock, just pushed the heavy oak door open and walked in, tracking mud across the hardwood like a middle finger to their pristine world. The living room smelled the same as it had 3 weeks ago. Oak polish, wine, Margaret's damn perfume. Daniel sat in his leather armchair, swirling a glass of Cabernet, while Margaret perched on the sofa, silk blouse pristine, her hazel eyes narrowing as he stormed in. Jake, she said, voice tight. We were worried. You didn't answer our calls. Yeah, well, I've been busy, he snapped, pulling the birth certificate from his jacket. It was creased now, worn from too many reads, but the name still hit like a punch. Mateo Ortiz. He tossed it onto the glass coffee table right between their drinks. Explain this. Daniel glanced at it, then back at his wine, like it was nothing. Margaret sighed, swirling her glass with that annoyed little twist of her wrist. I see Sarah's been talking, she said, calm as if they were discussing the weather. Jake's whole body went rigid. She didn't deny it, he said, voice ice cold. Say it. Say it out loud. Margaret leaned back, crossing her legs, her expression unbothered. Fine, she said. You weren't ours. We made you ours. His chest heaved. You bought me? We gave you a better life, she replied, simple as that, like she was ordering takeout. Rosa Ortiz couldn't have done half of what we did for you. Jake laughed, a hollow, bitter sound that echoed off the high ceilings. A better life? You think that justifies stealing me from my mom? Daniel finally spoke, setting his glass down with a sharp clink. You were meant to be ours, Jake. Rosa was never supposed to keep you. We had friends, people who handled things. Handled things, Jake repeated, fists clenching. You mean paid off the cops? Buried the case? Margaret's lips curled into a cold smile. Money's a powerful thing, Jacob. It opens doors or closes them. He couldn't breathe. The room spun, the walls pressing in. These people, the ones who'd cheered at his little league games, framed his college diploma, handed him a life most people dreamed of, they weren't just liars. They were monsters. You stole me from her, he said, voice shaking. Every day she looked for me, and you sat here sipping wine. Daniel rubbed his temples, exhaling like Jake was the one being unreasonable. What do you want, son? An apology? Regret? We've got nothing to be ashamed of. We did what was necessary. Necessary? Something snapped. Jake grabbed Daniel's wine glass and hurled it against the wall. It shattered, red streaking down the cream paint like a wound. Margaret flinched, a flicker of shock breaking her mask. But Daniel didn't move, just watched him with that same damn calm. You did what was evil, Jake growled, stepping closer. You ripped me from her and you don't even care. Margaret's eyes narrowed, her voice cutting. And yet here you are, successful, wealthy, privileged. You're welcome. Rage boiled over. I want nothing from you, he spat. You're dead to me. He turned, storming out, the door slamming behind him so hard the frame rattled. The rain hit him like a slap, soaking through his jacket, but he didn't stop, didn't look back. He slid into the car, slamming the door, chest heaving. Sarah looked over, Lily stirring in her lap. They admit it? Yeah, he said, voice raw. Didn't even blink. She nodded like she'd known. What now? He didn't answer, just stared at the windshield. Rain streaking down in rivers. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He yanked it out, expecting another call from Daniel, but it was Tom Hayes. He hit answer, hands shaking. Jake, you sitting down? Tom's voice was low, urgent. What? Jake snapped, wiping water from his face. I cracked that San Antonio file, got a guy down there to pull strings. There's new stuff, man. A witness came forward last year after Rosa died. Said he saw a guy matching Daniel Sullivan's description meeting with a shady lawyer in '97, right after Mateo went missing. Cash changed hands, big cash. Jake's blood ran cold. You're sure? Dead sure, Tom said. That's why the case got sealed. Someone buried it deep, but this witness, he's legit. Cops reopened it last week. Jake's grip tightened, the phone creaking. Not just a snatch and grab. A calculated deal. Daniel hadn't just taken him, he'd orchestrated it. Paid for it. Erased it. Thanks, Tom, he muttered, hanging up. He dropped the phone, staring at nothing, his whole damn life unraveling in his hands. Sarah watched him, quiet. What did he say? They planned it, he said, voice barely above a whisper. Daniel met some lawyer. Paid to make me disappear. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't look surprised. Bastards. Jake leaned back, closing his eyes. He saw it now, the boardroom smiles, the family photos, the life he'd thought was his. All fake. All built on Rosa's pain. He'd spent 30 years chasing their approval, their legacy, and it was rotten to the core. He opened his eyes, staring at the rain-slicked street. I'm done with them. Sarah nodded. Good. He drove back to his apartment in silence, the city a blur of lights and water. Inside, he paced the living room, the view of Puget Sound mocking him through the floor-to-ceiling windows. This wasn't home anymore, it was a cage, polished and pretty. Sarah set Lily on a blanket with some toys, then pulled a small box from her bag, the one Clara had given her in San Antonio. Here, she said, sliding it across the coffee table. Clara wanted you to have this. Jake hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a silver necklace, a round pendant engraved with an M. He flipped it over, April 14th, 1994. His birthday. The chain was worn like it had been held too many times. What's this? Rosa gave it to you when you were born, Sarah said softly. You never took it off till you know. His throat closed up. He ran his thumb over the engraving, imagining a woman he'd never met slipping it around his neck, her hands warm, her voice soft. She kept it? Clara did, Sarah said. After Rosa was gone. Jake clenched the necklace, the metal biting into his palm. He stood, crossing to the balcony doors, and stepped outside. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, the air sharp and cold. He leaned on the railing, 30 stories up, the city sprawling below, glittering, empty. He'd stood here 100 times, king of his little world, but it was all a lie. The Sullivans, the job, the name Jake, none of it was his. He turned back inside, meeting Sarah's gaze. I'm ready, he said, voice steady for the first time in days. I'm ready to be Mateo. She smiled, just a small one, but real. Then let's go home. He nodded, slipping the necklace into his pocket. Seattle wasn't his anymore. San Antonio was calling Clara. Rosa's memory. A life he'd never known. He grabbed his keys, his jacket, and one last look at the skyline. Let's get the hell out of here. The Texas sun dipped low, painting the San Antonio sky in streaks of gold and pink. Mateo Ortiz stood in Clara's backyard, dirt caked under his nails. A small mesquite tree trembling in the hole he'd just dug. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His old Seattle button-up swapped for a faded t-shirt that smelled like earth and freedom. 2 years had passed since he'd walked away from the Sullivans, from the glass towers and cold rain of the Pacific Northwest. 2 years since he'd signed the papers that buried Jake Sullivan for good and claimed the name Mateo Ortiz his name, the one Rosa had given him. Clara stepped out from the kitchen, a glass of iced tea in her hand, her gray-streaked hair pulled back in a loose bun. She set the drink on the rickety patio table and watched him work, a soft smile tugging at her lips. That's for her. Huh? Mateo nodded, patting the soil around the tree's roots. Yeah. Figured Rosa'd like something growing here. His voice was quiet, steady, not the clipped, tense edge it used to carry. He straightened up, wiping his hands on his jeans, and took a long sip of the tea. It was sweet, sharp with lemon, the kind of taste that screamed Texas summer. She'd love it, Clara said, her dark eyes glinting with something like pride. She'd love seeing you like this too. Mateo's chest tightened. He'd never meet Rosa, never hear her laugh, feel her hug, thank her for the years she spent searching. But standing here, the warm air brushing his skin, he felt her somehow. In Clara's eyes, in the letters she'd left behind, in the necklace he now wore every day, the M resting against his collarbone. I wish I'd known her, he said, staring at the tree, even just for a day. Clara crossed the yard, her sandals crunching on the dry grass, and put a hand on his arm. She's in you, Mateo. That stubborn streak, that heart she gave you, those. He swallowed hard, nodding. Before he could answer, a shriek cut through the air, high-pitched and wild. Lily tore across the yard, all curls and scraped knees, chasing a butterfly that didn't stand a chance. Sarah followed close behind, laughing as she scooped the toddler up and spun her around. Gotcha, you little monster. Mateo grinned, the sound pulling him out of his head. Lily 3 now, a tornado of energy wiggled free and ran to him, wrapping her arms around his leg. Tio Mateo, she squealed, her pronunciation of uncle adorably off. Hey kiddo, he said, ruffling her hair. She beamed up at him, then darted off again, leaving a trail of giggles. Sarah caught his eye, brushing a strand of dark hair from her face, her smile soft but knowing. Never thought I'd see you playing family man, she teased, crossing her arms. Yeah, well, he shot back, smirking. Never thought I'd see you chasing a kid around Texas instead of digging through old case files. She laughed, a real, belly-deep sound that echoed across the yard. Touché. Clara watched them, leaning against the patio railing. You two are trouble together, she said, shaking her head. Always were. Mateo raised an eyebrow. You mean back when I was Mateo the First? Exactly, Clara said, her smile turning wistful. You and Sarah, thick as thieves. Rosa used to say you'd take over the world one day. He glanced at Sarah, who shrugged like it was no big deal. But it was. She'd spent 20 years tracking him down through dead ends, dusty records, and a promise to a woman who'd never stopped hoping. He owed her more than he could ever say. Guess we're still figuring that part out, he said, voice low. The backyard filled with noise as the evening settled in Lily's chatter, the hum of cicadas, a neighbor's radio playing mariachi down the street. Mateo grabbed a beer from the cooler Clara kept by the back door, popping the cap with a flick of his thumb. He took a sip, the cold fizz cutting through the heat, and leaned against the house, watching the scene unfold. This messy, loud, real life wasn't something Jake Sullivan could have imagined. But Mateo Ortiz? He was starting to get the hang of it. Inside, on the kitchen counter, a frame caught his eye through the screen door. His official papers. Mateo Ortiz, permanent resident of San Antonio, Texas. He'd signed them 2 years back, hands shaking as he scratched out Jake Sullivan for the last time. It hadn't been easy leaving the job, the apartment, the name he'd worn like armor. But standing here, beer in hand, the weight of that choice felt lighter every day. Clara followed his gaze, nodding toward the frame. So how's it feel? How's what feel? He asked, playing dumb. She smirked. Being where you're supposed to be. He took another sip, letting the question settle. Feels right, he said finally. Like I'm not running anymore. Her eyes softened. Rosa'd be proud, you know. Real proud. The words hit deep, lodging somewhere in his chest. He'd never know her voice, her touch, but he had this Clara, Sarah, Lily. A home that wasn't built on lies. It was enough. More than enough. Later, after Lily crashed out on the couch and Clara headed to bed, Mateo and Sarah took the old pickup Clara had loaned him years back. They drove out to the edge of town, the highway stretching dark and endless under a sky full of stars brighter than anything he'd seen in Seattle. Sarah rolled the window down, letting the warm wind whip through the cab, her hair a wild mess. So what now? She asked, leaning back in the passenger seat, her voice cutting through the hum of the engine. Mateo kept his eyes on the road, hands loose on the wheel. That's the million-dollar question, huh? She smirked. You always had a plan, Mr. Corner Office. Don't tell me you're winging it now. For once, yeah, he said, chuckling. No spreadsheets, no board meetings. Just this. Sarah nodded like she got it. And me? What's my next move? He glanced at her, the dashboard lights catching the curve of her smile. You came here looking for me. Found me. What's after that? She shrugged, staring out at the passing scrubland. Never thought that far. Guess we're both lost now. Lost together, he said, half joking, but it felt true. A comfortable silence stretched between them, the truck rumbling along, tires humming on the asphalt. Then Sarah reached into her bag, pulling out that old photo, the one she'd shown him back in Seattle. A little boy with blue eyes, grinning in the dirt, a pigtailed girl beside him. Mateo and Sarah, summer '97. She handed it over. You remember this yet? He took it, running his thumb over the faded edges. The boy's face, his face stared back, but the memory didn't come. Not the way he wanted. No flashes of backyard games or Rosa's voice calling him in. Just a faint pull, a warmth he couldn't name. No, he said, honest. Not yet. Maybe someday, Sarah said, her voice soft but sure. He nodded, slipping the photo into the glove box and shutting it with a quiet click. Maybe. He turned the key, the engine roaring to life, and pulled back onto the road. The stars stretched out ahead, endless and bright, and for the first time in his life, his real life, Mateo drove forward with no map, no plan, just the open road and the people who'd brought him home. 2 years ago, he'd thought losing everything, the name, the job, the Sullivans, would break him. But it hadn't. It had freed him. He'd walked away from a lie and found something real, messy, imperfect, but his. Clara's house, Sarah's laugh, Lily's chaos, Rosa's memory, they were his now, roots sinking deep into Texas soil. He didn't regret a damn thing. As the truck rolled on, Mateo exhaled, the weight of the past settling into place, not heavy anymore, just there, a part of him. He didn't need to be Jake Sullivan, didn't need the corner office or the approval he'd chased for decades. He was Mateo Ortiz, and that was enough. Sometimes, he said, half to Sarah, half to himself, you've got to lose it all to find yourself. She smiled, leaning her head against the window. Yeah. Took you long enough to figure that out. He laughed, the sound carrying into the night, and kept driving toward whatever came next with a name that finally fit. Mateo's story ends here. What did you take away from his journey? If this hit you in the feels, smash that subscribe button and leave a comment below. What would you do to find your real home? Let's chat about it.